Welcome to the Inspiration North podcast, inspiring stories from inspirational people and how they found their passion, their true north. I'm James Eves.
And I'm Michelle Minikin, and this is the Inspiration North podcast.
In the studio on this episode, we are joined by Mike Cockburn. He talks about how to make a career from your strengths, how creativity is not just about art, and hear about story-based learning and positive psychology.
Mike is a fully paid-up, card-carrying Smoggie. His early career was spent in recruitment before he progressed into leadership development with CPCR. In 2004, inspired by his passion for coaching, he established Sogno. Along with one-to-one coaching, the business has developed to provide a wide range of leadership development programs, often with the aim of helping organisations embed effective coaching into their leadership culture. Recently, this has included using interactive, story-based learning to enable participants to develop high-level interpersonal skills. He recently set up a business book group to share his love of reading, and he is a board member of Dance City, a role that has been incredibly rewarding over the past few years.
Great, thank you, Michelle. Thank you for joining us, Mike. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Michelle.
So, Mike, why don't we get started? Let's take you back to when you were a little boy and you were thinking, what do I want to do in life? What were you thinking at that point in time?
Well, I wanted to be either a footballer or a cricketer. And at what age do you get to when you realise that you haven't got the talent to be either of those? Probably about 12. And I didn't really have any other idea at that stage. And I guess over the next 4 or 5 years, I sort of drifted into recruitment. That was my original sort of starting in my career. My dad had his own engineering business. My dad was a really practical guy. I was completely impractical. And to the point that I did metalwork in school, and I think when I was about 12 or 13 I came bottom in metalwork. We had to make like a tin box, and to pass the exam it had to hold water, and I had about 20 goes at it and had huge pieces of solder on the corners, and it still didn't work, so I finished up coming bottom. So I think the writing was on the wall at that stage.
Were you making a sieve?
That's what it turned out as. That wasn't the original intention. So when I was about 20, my dad said that he was going to take early retirement, and he'd arranged with the guys he was working with to put some money together to buy the business. So that was a really good decision for me and for him, I think, because that would have been disastrous. And I really respect him for not kind of pushing me into the sort of family business. Although he didn't discuss it with me, and I think it would have been nice to have had a conversation about it. But that was decision made there. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the things that when I look back, I was probably good as an introvert. I think I was always a good listener and a good team worker. I had no sense at the time, I don't think, that you could actually make a career out of those kind of interpersonal skills. Yeah. So as I say, I sort of drifted into recruitment. When I left, I went to Sheffield Polytechnic. When I left the Polytechnic, I applied to the Department of Employment. They had this sort of graduate entrance scheme, and I thought that was a good opportunity to get a start, because there was such a huge intake that they took in. And the Department of Employment was one of the biggest departments, so I put the Department of Employment down as my first choice, and that was basically how that all sort of transpired. So my first job was as an employment advisor, working in the job centres. So the job centres just started at that particular point. It was a 6-month training course, completely overblown, including a 4-week interviewing course. It was absolutely dire. So I knew that wasn't going to be right for me. But at the same time, they just started off an executive recruitment arm called Professional and Executive Recruitment. And I had a chance to join that in its early stages. It was one of the first businesses to utilise computer matching for matching candidates to opportunities. And I really enjoyed that. It was commercial, kind of fee orientated, and I actually learned a lot in that role compared to what I'd learned in the employment advisor role.
Yeah, that's great. Fairly similar sort of first jobs as me as well, actually. Yes, that was good fun.
Probably a lot of other people as well, yeah.
In the job centre. Excellent. So when did you escape Teesside?
When I was like 18 or so, when I went to Sheffield Polytechnic. I think I can call it Sheffield Hallam University now. So I had 2 years there doing business studies, and I'm trying to think. Actually, I've not really lived on Teesside very much since then.
No. When did you move up to Newcastle?
That's a good question. That's a long time ago, probably maybe 25 years ago. So I've worked in Newcastle for a long time.
Okay, so when did you switch to tell us about CPCR, because that's really interesting work you were doing there.
Can I just backtrack a bit?
Yeah,
So before CPCR, I worked for Austin Night Selection. So I'd worked in various sort of ropey employment agencies up to that point, and Austin Night Selection was a national business that had really big clients, both public and private sector clients. And that was a step up for me. So, and I think in taking that role on, I started to understand a bit more about my creativity as well, because I was never any good at music or art at school, and I think you got kind of pigeonholed as being artistic or not, depending on what you were good at. And I'd always enjoyed writing, and joining Austin Night gave me the chance to use my writing skills. We used to do really large scale recruitment campaigns, work with the designers as part of the design of those campaigns. So and it was a much more professional organisation, so I really had to up my game at that point. And also while I was there, we got trained in psychometrics. So that was when I look back, it's probably the biggest shift in my career, really. There's a guy called Ray Woods who I worked with at Austin Night, and Ray was really generous. They decided to train all of the consulting team on psychometrics, and he offered me the chance to go on the first programme at the Spider's Web Hotel in Watford, and that's exactly how he'd imagined it. And that just gave me a completely new perspective on things. One of the things that I thought was really interesting around that was the way I'd been working in recruitment was to try and make sure that I got the best possible fit between the candidate's experience and the job that he or she was applying to. And I started to realise that it's also about potential, that if somebody's moving into a new role, they need some headroom, they've got to be able to develop into it. And I started to see it from a different angle. So that whole area around potential and development, I think, probably stems from that experience. So when I moved to CPCR, I kind of went originally as a recruiter, but I learned a huge amount about development and coaching when I was at CPCR. And again, there's a big sort of watershed moment for me there. CPCR grew out of Northumbrian Water, and we used to do outdoor development for Northumbrian Water at the Kielder Forest at the Reservoirs at Tarset in Kielder. And it was a sort of mandatory thing that when you joined the business, you had to go on the Kielder course, as they called it. And I was a bit of a skeptic. I really couldn't see how there's any relationship between working in an office and running around Kielder Forest in the middle of January in the freezing cold. But it was absolutely amazing. Really learned a huge amount from that. We did the Myers-Briggs type indicator as part of the learning on the programme, and it's really interesting just to spend time sitting down at the end of exercises and reviewing how they went and looking at options and possibilities of how we could do them better and how we could then develop as a team over the week. So when I got back to the office, Simon, who's one of the directors of CPCR, who's the facilitator in the group I was working in, had a chat with him afterwards to review the whole experience, and he said at the end of the conversation, you really seem to get into the reviews of the exercises, which is really true. And he said, have you thought about going back as a facilitator when we do the next course? And I kind of said, well, not really. It's not really the kind of stuff that I do. I'm kind of focused on recruitment. And I got up, and my office was further down the corridor, and I was walking back down the corridor, and I thought, I don't know why I've said that, because that's a fantastic opportunity. So I walked around, did a U-turn in the corridor, walked straight back to his office, stuck my head around the door and said, look, I'd really love to do that. And he engineered an opportunity for me to go on the next one as a facilitator. And and that was really where I started to get more actively involved in doing development work.
That's brilliant.
And so it's been almost a transition, a gradual process of discovering the talent of listening, communicating, talking to people, facilitation, the potential that people have, the development, which is that what was the direction to work more with leaders, to work, I mean, I suppose it's the transition to having your own company. What was sort of to follow that process to get to where you are now?
I wouldn't describe it as grandly as that, James. I don't think it was a process. I think it was a lot of it was just happenstance, really. I think I discovered these things as I went along. So yeah, I think one thing built on another and opened up new doors. I think that was really how that sort of all developed. And of course, the industry was developing at the time as well. So when I learned, when I did the psychometrics program, Austenite, one of the first businesses to start to use psychometrics on a large scale. I remember when I was at CPCR, we had some recruitment work to do with Northumbrian Water, and they were interested in using assessment centres. Again, that's really new. And Kelvin, one of the other directors, said, look, there you go, sort out an assessment centre. I had no idea what I was doing. I had to go and do some research and read up on it and just kind of put it together, but it went really well. And that was another area then that started to develop for us. So I think there's a combination of those two things. I think maybe getting positive feedback that things were working well and enjoying what I was doing and just getting a sense that there was a potential there to develop further.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you come across Tal Ben-Shahar's book, Happier. He has an exercise there where he suggests to people that what you do is you write down in 3 circles. In one circle, the things that you're good at. In the next one, the things that you enjoy doing. And in the third one, the things that give your life a sense of meaning and purpose. And then you've got to try and put those circles together, because the sweet spot in the middle where they all overlap, that's not going to feel like work. That's going to draw energy out of you rather than have to put energy into it. And I think when I look back, hopefully I was good at recruitment, and I certainly used to enjoy it. And it gave me a sense of meaning to some degree. But I think getting more involved in development and coaching has added that dimension. So I have a really strong sense now that I'm right in the middle of that model. That the kind of work I'm doing in terms of development and so on is really adding to that sense of meaning and purpose in terms of what I'm doing.
It's like that old saying: if you do what you love doing, you never work a day in your life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Excellent. So, who are the types of people that you help, Mike, in terms of your coaching clients?
In terms of coaching, I've done. It's very broad ranging, but I've concentrated and focused more on career transition in the last 4 or 5 years. I think that's sort of reflected in the economy as well. That organisations are constantly changing shape, and that's leading to people sort of moving on and taking on new options. So I've found that really rewarding. I think it's because I think I've been on that journey myself. I think I've discovered things about myself and understood aspects of my potential. And I think that applies to all of us. We've all got huge reservoirs of potential that we maybe haven't tapped into in our careers, and being able to spend some focused time with people, giving them the chance to talk through those things, to put some thought behind it, to consider options and possibilities, and then to facilitate them moving into a new positive direction. Has been just really rewarding. So those people come from a whole range of backgrounds, typically big businesses, but not exclusively so. And that can be people from administrative roles right through to senior executive roles. And then the other thing we've done a lot of in the last 5 or 6 years has been helping businesses to embed coaching as part of their leadership culture. So that happened quite quickly. When I set up Sogno in 2004, clients were saying, this whole thing around coaching looks really interesting, and is it possible to help our managers to utilise coaching skills? So we've worked with a number of clients on those kinds of programs where we're not training them to be coaches as such, because that's clearly not their role. They are ultimately line managers and so on, but certainly help them to use the dynamics of coaching conversations to get better results. So you can apply that in a 15-minute conversation by asking the other person what they're trying to achieve, what actually happened, what options they've got to do it differently the next time around, and then to get them to make their own decision, which do you think is going to be the best choice for you to make to get the results that you want, and then reviewing that with them. It's a fairly simple model. That's kind of at the core, the heart of coaching, and if people can start to appreciate that and embed it in their day-to-day work, there's numerous opportunities that people have on a day-to-day basis to do that. So that means that they're having to think less about the detail of the job, and somebody else is taking on the responsibility and the accountability for getting things done. Mm-hmm. So that's easy to say. It's not so easy to do, because a lot of people have grown up with a different model, which is that the manager's the expert and the manager's the decision maker, and they have to try and put that identity to one side to become a different type of manager and leader.
Maybe this is a good point to talk about story-based learning. So Michelle and I were at an event recently that Mike introduced this concept as a way of, as it sounds, learning, coaching. So please tell us a bit more about story-based learning and how you use that.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that kind of applies back to this idea of developing people as coaches. We found that quite often we'd run a couple of workshops and we'd ask people how much coaching they'd done between the workshops, and they would typically say, I haven't done very much. First of all, I haven't had the chance to sit down with somebody for 2 hours and discuss their childhood. Or coaching's great for positive situations, but it doesn't work if something's gone wrong. So it was exactly the opposite of what we were trying to get people to think about in terms of how they could apply it. So we thought what we need really is a way of reflecting the real life day-to-day challenges, as opposed to doing it in a slightly removed situation in a kind of classroom setting. So there's obviously useful learning there, but it's not all of it. So story-based learning came out of that. So typically what we do is we listen to the organisation to try and find out what sorts of things they'd like people to work on, and what sorts of challenges come up on a typical basis inside the organisation. And then we'll create a scenario. So that's where the story bit sort of comes into play. We give them the start of the story. They watch kind of a short mini play, which is played out by role players. And then we give them the chance to do a whole range of things, but certainly to interact with the role players, so that they can find out about their relationship, they can find out about the jobs that they do, they can find out about past problems they might have had between the two of them. And then we, in pretty much everything we do with story-based learning, give people the chance then to do some coaching with the role players in character. So it allows them to, in a safe space, to experiment with coaching skills and to see how that works in those kind of real-life situations. So we call it learning without teaching. So everybody starts from the point that they're actually at. So they might have very advanced skills, they might be quite basic skills, but they can utilise them wherever they're starting from. And we have a lot of fun with it. It's really entertaining and enjoyable, and I think that's certainly what we've picked up in terms of feedback from the people we've worked with as well. And that's what you want from any sort of learning activity, is that it is memorable, because if it's not memorable, people are not going to apply it back in the workplace. So doing something that is enjoyable and fun, I think, is a critical part of learning. It really increases the chance that the learning gets applied back in the workplace.
No, totally. We only had a sort of very brief foray into it, and it was so entertaining and so thought-provoking as well. We loved it. So if you could sort of pick what your favourite bits of your sort of career have been, and sort of what you want to do more of now, what's that?
So first of all, I want to do more coaching. Mm-hmm. So that's very high up on the list. And I think particularly around career coaching, I think because of the kind of expertise and resources I've developed over the last few years, I think I've started to get a real sort of insight into that. I do a lot of reading as well, and that's one of the areas I've done a lot of reading around, because the world of work is changing really fast, and people's attitudes and so on have not really kept pace, I don't think. So helping people to appreciate the possibilities, I think, are really interesting. So I've just read this book called the multi-hyphen method.
Oh, I love that. I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, it's so that's really about saying I've got a job title that's got a number of hyphens in it. So I'm a podcaster, I'm a leadership developer, I'm a writer, whatever that might be. So that's all perfectly acceptable and reasonable and realistic nowadays. So that's definitely one area that I'm really keen to develop further. I've done a lot of work in the Middle East in the last few years, in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates, and in Egypt. So I've got 2 or 3 things that I'm developing at the moment that we're looking at sort of extending further. So that's been amazing. Just met some fantastic people out there, and people are so keen to learn. One of the things we're exploring with Herbert Thinking Digital is to take the Thinking Digital conference out to Cairo. And I guess one of the other areas that I'd like to do more of is just from a kind of volunteering perspective. So as you mentioned, James, I'm on the board at Dance City, and that's just been an amazing experience. I've been there for about 4 years or so now, and it's just an incredibly productive organisation. Just work with some great people there, and it fits with the things I was saying before as well. It's all about creativity, it's all about potential, it's all about development, and it provides an opportunity for people to develop that doesn't exist elsewhere. It doesn't exist in schools, and it doesn't exist, for people who want to go to dance classes and so on. It's providing a really interesting need. So the Dance City's doing really well. It's expanding, and I'd like to just do more of that, really.
Are you a dancer yourself, Mike?
I was just about to ask the same question.
Got him first.
I do got yoga classes there, though.
Okay. Not a dancer?
No.
Just imagined you as like a Latin dancer there, I don't know why.
There's another term I'd like you to talk about, Mike. You talk about positive psychology.
Yes.
What does that actually mean?
So one of the ways it's been described, well, first of all, the origins of that, James, are that Martin Seligman, who's seen as being the developer of positive psychology, his sort of view was that psychologists have been supporting people who've got problems and deficits in life, and a lot of the developments of psychology have come in wartime, particularly around the First World War and the Second World War. So, of course, people who've got challenges and problems in life do need help and support, and the kind of interventions that have been developed have been really, really helpful to people. But psychology, up until 20, 30 years ago, generally disregarded everybody else. So people are doing okay in life, but could be happier, healthier, more fulfilled. It hasn't really paid much attention to. And that was really his motivation, was to see if psychology could be widened out so that it would then provide benefits for everybody. I think the other thing that sort of marks it out as being different is that it's generally research-based. So people who are engaged in developing positive psychology are testing out their ideas. So it's more than just a sort of happy-clappy sort of approach. There's some demonstrable evidence that it does make a difference. So to give you one example of that, one of the key things in positive psychology is strengths-based development. So, it sounds kind of obvious, but a lot of people pay a huge amount of attention to their weaknesses, however you describe that, development needs. And if you think about it, you're far more likely to be successful in life and also to be happy and fulfilled if you focus on the things that you're naturally good at. So positive psychology is about trying to help people to uncover, identify what those things are, and then to put them into practice and to utilise them effectively. So that's something I do a lot in coaching. That's one of the things that I've applied a lot. But one of the things I'm really passionate about with positive psychology is about how that can be scaled up. A lot of the stuff that's been written on positive psychology has been written for the individual, and clearly that is really helpful again, because we all want to have happier and more fulfilled lives. But it's when you can scale it up at a team level or an organisational culture level that I think you can really see the huge payoffs. a lot of organisations have kind of toxic cultures, and it's a kind of antidote to that. And again, you've got to search hard, but if you look through the literature, there are some really interesting examples of businesses who have been able to put that into practice at a cultural level. And there's a lot of evidence that suggests that those businesses perform better on standard metrics. You know, they have better return on investment, better profitability, lower costs. So I think when it starts to go forward, I think it's got massive potential.
No, and it's not all about ping pong tables and football, is it?
That's a part of it. If that's right for your organisation.
Well, it's horrible in here, so let's get a football table.
Yeah. So that could be just a sticking plaster.
Yeah.
And it certainly goes deeper than that, a lot deeper than that. And I think it has a lot of links to coaching as well. I think if people applied the dynamics of coaching, if they just listened more, if they supported and encouraged people more, just empowered people more, all of those things would start to go towards creating a more positive psychology-based culture.
Yeah, there was a lovely white paper came out of Gallup not that long ago about that sort of developing and coaching managers and how much happier employees are with that. So.
Yeah.
Who would be, so if this sounds of interest to any of our listeners, who is the person in the organisation that either as an employee I would go to, or if I recognise that I am the person to do something about that, who would that typically be within a structure?
If you had a problem or
so let's say what we've talked about today, positive psychology, coaching, story-based learning, is it the L&D director? Is it the CEO? Do you have a particular point in a structure that you deal with?
I think you're most likely to get traction if it's the CEO. One of the best examples I've come across of organisations putting these ideas into practice is Whole Foods Market. It's an American sort of Whole Foods supermarket. They've got a couple of branches in the UK. It was in the news recently. It was taken over by Walmart, which is always a really big challenge in these situations. If the business gets taken over, by Amazon, taken over by Amazon. If you get taken over by these big organisations, can you maintain that culture? But that's very much driven by John Mackey, who's the chief executive of Whole Foods Market, and they developed this concept of stakeholder leadership. So what they do is they look at the stakeholders of the business from a really wide perspective. So it goes much further than just the actual shareholders and the employees and so on. And it looks at things like the government, the local community, the environment. They have numerous stakeholders, and then what they do is, when they come to make decisions, try to make sure that they're ideally adding value to all of those stakeholders, and the worst case that they're not doing any damage to them. And if you think about the traditional organisations, because their decision making is very narrow, they cause lots of problems to people who interface and are impacted by the organisation. So that's a really simple thing.
Yeah.
Again, a lot of this stuff is simple, but it's challenging to put into practice. So I think as I say, you're more likely to get traction from the chief executive, but it certainly needs to be somebody, I think, who's got the passion, kind of gets it really, I suppose. And we have had quite a bit of success working with managers who manage discrete parts of organisations, so people who run factories within a large sort of multinational or whatever. Quite often they have that scope to make changes in their own environments. But they're less likely to stick, I think, because it is dependent very often on 2 or 3 key people. And if they move on, they get promoted to a different role or whatever, then it starts to sort of dissipate quite quickly. So it's the longevity of it, which I think is one of the biggest challenges.
Definitely. So, totally changing the subject now. If you could go back to 18-year-old Mike, what advice would you give him?
I've been thinking about this because you prompted me.
I did.
And my advice really, I think, to my 18-year-old self would be to basically, I was going to say work hard. It's not really work harder, but to try and find something that you're motivated and energized by. The school I went to was a sort of, it was like halfway between a grammar school and a secondary modern, but it had a kind of secondary modern sort of culture to it. The sort of mindset, certainly amongst the pupils, was just do as little as possible to get the best possible results. And that stuck with me for a long time. I certainly took that to higher education, and I took that into my first jobs, I guess, as well, really. And that was, when I look back, a huge waste of potential. Who knows, really? You know what difference that would have made, but I certainly had the wrong perception of the world and how the world works, and if I could go back and give myself a good talking to, then that'd be certainly one of the things I'd try and impress upon myself.
Lovely, thank you.
So what's the best way to get in touch with you, Mike?
Social media is probably the best bet, particularly LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn a lot. I'm also on Facebook. I think you're going to post those up on
We
the...
will, yes.
Yeah.
We'll do that.
I also have a book group as well, so I'm in a conventional book group, and I've gained a huge amount out of that, just chatting about books and just hearing people's different perspectives on the same piece of work. And as I said, I do a lot of reading for work, so I thought it'd be interesting to set up a business book group. So that's been running for about 2 years now. We use Dan City as the location for it. Originally, we started off with the idea of everybody reading the same piece of work. And I was getting people email me the week before saying I can't come because I haven't read the book. And I was thinking, I'm not a teacher here, so we've changed that approach. So now I'll post what I'm reading, but we just ask people to come along. You can just listen if you want to, but if you want to share something you've been reading that's inspired you, then there's a kind of open invitation. So there's a LinkedIn. It's called the Sogno Business Book Group, and that's also on LinkedIn. So if people want to have a look at that, and then send me a request to join, and I'll make sure that gets processed really quickly. And then we send out updates on the LinkedIn book group.
Great.
Excellent.
We shall. We'll wrap up there. Thanks for coming in, Mike.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for listening. Check out all the show notes at inspirationnorth.com. Join us again for the next episode when we'll be chatting to another inspirational person. If you like this, subscribe and tell your friends. If you didn't like this, subscribe anyway and tell everybody.